All right, welcome everybody to the fourth and final IRIS Center Digital Humanities Brown Bag. So thank you everybody who's here, especially we're in week 14 of what feels like a very, very long semester. So thank you for being here on a Friday in week 14. So today's topic will be the Madison Historical Online Encyclopedia and Digital Archive. So this is an online encyclopedia and digital archive for Madison County, Illinois. And the project directors and researchers will be presenting on their experiences in building this archive and probably discussing larger topics about the benefits and challenges of a project like this and where it might go in the future. Before I turn it over to them, I would just like to say thank you to Katie Knowles, who's running the camera today, and Ben Richardson, who's been running the camera all of the other times. And also to Dr. Jessica Despain, who unfortunately cannot be here today due to a schedule conflict, but sends her sincere apologies and wishes she could be here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Christine. I'm Jason Stacy. I'm one of the co-editors of Madison Historical. Jeff Manuel, also one of the co-editors, is with us today. And Ben Ostermeyer, who is our tech director, is here. We're going to talk about different aspects of the project. I'm going to talk about its inception. Ben is going to talk about some of its technical attributes. And Jeff is going to talk about where this fits broadly within the digital humanities and public history. The project is now less than a year old. We started officially in August by sitting in a room that was formerly Andrew Theising's office that was completely bare with a group of some graduate students and trying to figure out what we're going to call it. So in less than a year, we have come a long way from where we were, and hopefully today we'll talk about some of the places that we'd like to go. So you can see that the background of the project is that our hope that we would generate a new project coordinated by the SIUE History Department, but that it would not be strictly a History Department endeavor. And I'll talk about some ways in which this came about in an unusual fashion for those of us in the history business trying to find a project. We hope that eventually this will be work with collaboration with local institutions and the community at large. We often use the word a hub, that it will serve as a hub both for the community's interest in history and also the community's knowledge of history, so that in our second year we really hope to move to making this a place where the community will not only visit to learn about its history, but will also contribute, creating this cross-fertilization between the history department, the community, and our local heritage institutions, museums, and archives. And overwhelmingly, the structure is as an encyclopedia and a digital archive that work in tandem with each other. And I'll talk a little bit about how those two ideally work together and some ways we've tried to put that together so far. But first, the origins of it. So the last time that a history of Madison County was written was for the centennial of Madison County, which means that it was published in 1912. And there is the cover page of the Centennial History of Madison County, Illinois, and its people, 1812 to 1912. And most history projects begin when a historian or a student is looking for a gap in the literature. We read widely the secondary literature. We explore opportunities for untapped primary sources, and then we generate either overlooked gaps in the historical record, or we look at interpretations that we believe are incorrect or incomplete, and we try to fill those in. But generally, it's a kind of hothouse with historians reading other historians and trying to find a way to speak to other historians speaking to each other. This came about very differently, in that the superintendent of the Regional Office of Education, Robert Dyer, came to the interim chancellor of SIUE, Stephen Hansen, who was also a trained historian, and said, there's not been a history of Madison County for 100 years. And there's been a whole lot of history of Madison County in the last 100 years. Your history department is in Madison County. Maybe you should do something about this. So Steve Hansen came to Jeff and to me and said, well, there hasn't been a history of Madison County for 100 years. You guys should do something about this. And the idea was that we would maybe begin a process of writing a book of the second 100 years. Now, the first history of Madison County, of its first 100 years, is 2 volumes, about 1,200 pages, and it begins with this quote. Sorry, I just think this really captures what history was in 1912. History is but the pen portraiture of great men in action. Kings of commerce, finance, manufactures, agriculture, science and literature, and leaders in patriotic and religious achievement. So, as you can imagine, Jeff and I were a little skeptical of writing the next 1,200 pages of the second 100 years of the history of Madison County. But we talked about it some more, and we thought this might be a really interesting opportunity for digital history in particular, and the digital humanities in general, a way in which we could think about the history of the second 100 years of Madison County in a medium that would be more dynamic, and also involve more of the community, and ideally involve more of our students in its production. So just briefly, some of the structure here, and a lot of this is really a testament to Ben Ostermeyer's talents in being able to put our harebrained ideas into really practical effect. But our idea behind it was, of course, it's common in the digital humanities. The book, the traditional codex, really can only be read in one way. You start at the beginning, and you work your way through it. But of course, an encyclopedia doesn't work like that, even if it is bound between pages, covers. An encyclopedia is meant to be a piece that's flipped through and organized. And in that regard, the encyclopedia almost lends itself to improvement through the online medium. And one of the things that we wanted to do is not only break the traditional narrative of the history of Madison County by taking the encyclopedia approach, but we wanted it to have 2 areas primarily of organization that communicated with each other. And these are images taken from the front page, and we'll show you the front page of the site itself once Ben talks about the details of the site. But when you come to the site, you're invited to explore the encyclopedia or explore the archive. The encyclopedia is a traditional online encyclopedia in that it's got your article. We do give author names so that the author is linked. It does have images. And probably the primary difference between the most well-known digital encyclopedia, Wikipedia, is that we vet all of our articles and they go through an editorial board. But what we wanted to do with this site also is we wanted to create a digital archive that began to collect and digitize some of the artifacts of Madison County as a way for individuals to explore primary sources in the raw. But one of the ways in which we seek these 2 large pieces of the site to articulate with each other is that all of our images send users into the archive itself. So to click on the image would not only call up the image itself, but, and Ben will show you this, it sends you to a page where the artifact can be found, which is part of a collection of documents, along with tags that are linked, not only by time period, but by other documents and also subject areas, so that a user can enter into the history of Madison County in many different ways. They can enter it via the encyclopedia, a secondary source, interpreted, or they can enter it via the archive, which would then take them into encyclopedia articles, or they can move in between the 2 entities of the site itself. This is the primary division we have in the site, but we have others as well. Oops, let's see here. Where are we going, Ben? It stopped advancing. There we go. We also have it so it can be explored by century, the 2 and some change centuries of Madison County history. so that, let's say, a student is writing a paper on Madison County in the 20th century, or looking for a topic to write on, or looking for artifacts. They can just use the classic chronological divisions. And also we have it divided by themes. You can see our themes here are government, industry, education, law, and culture. There is some strategic rationale to these themes, in that we are not only supported through the Regional Office of Education, but through private donors in the region. And for that reason, we've taken the tactic of organizing the option of thematic structure that reflects some of the interests of the stakeholders in the site itself. And hopefully Jeff will bring up some of the balance that needs to happen between historical practice with integrity and also private donors that have an interest in the community. And we also have the site divided by the regions, by the communities that reside in the county. And this brings up an element of the site that I find most interesting, is that, to my knowledge, most sites like this, encyclopedias mostly, tend to be at the state level or at the city level. There aren't a whole lot that take a county as the unit for historical study. And most Americans don't really think of the county. It's kind of like the township. They don't usually think of it as anything but a municipal entity that wouldn't necessarily be worth giving a history itself. Madison County, however, as we all know, is very diverse. Economically, socially, ethnically. There's all sorts of contours and nooks and crannies to Madison County. And so we have here, as you can see, from Fairmont City to Edwardsville to Grant Fork, and this is only a portion of them. We've got the possibility for a member of the community to find their own community there and explore the articles and archives that are there, but also to just get a sense of the range of communities that are in Madison County. This also is a way to keep us honest, in that a lot of these we don't have anything on yet. For example, I think it was Cottage Hills. Was it Cottage Hills? I was driving through Cottage, and I saw a sign that we were entering Cottage Hills. This is when we were heading up to Alton. And I realized I didn't know anything about Cottage Hills. We didn't have anything in the site on Cottage Hills. And the fact that Ben here now has all of these communities as links makes it clear to us that we really need to get something in there on Cottage Hills. And it's something that we've been mindful of in our first 10 months together, is keeping in mind that Madison County is easily summarized by its large communities. Granite City, Alton, Edwardsville. But there are also all sorts of communities in Madison County that are very different from those large urban centers. Our project team is really a kind of cross-section of the Department of Historical Studies, so that there are three of us who serve as editors. Jeff and I are both really kind of mid-career. We're associate professors. Steve Hansen is a senior member of the department. We hired 3 graduate assistants that primarily serve as research assistants, and we give them very particular tasks that they complete over a short period of time and then move on to others. And one of the key elements of that we like the most is these graduate students have the opportunity to go to archives, to interview members of the community for our oral histories, and to really see the practice of history, the learning of history, is something that can happen locally. Ben, our tech developer, is a graduate from the Department of Historical Studies who took a minor in computer science, so in many ways he's the perfect person for this job, and we're never going to let him go. And we've started in second semester, and we'll continue that next semester, hiring undergraduate assistants through the IRCA program. And we're going to pilot something in the fall that I'm excited about, in that we have received funding to hire a graduate assistant to lead a team of IRCA undergraduates specifically concentrating on the theme of education. So that then there will be not only the learning experience that a lot of these researchers have, but also the teaching experience that our graduate team leader will have on that project. Now, you don't have to read all of these, but I just wanted to put up here our editorial board to give you a sense of the range of peer reviewers that we have that have agreed to help us review these. And you can see that not all of them are from the Department of Historical Studies. Many of them are community members who have some interest and expertise. And all of our articles go through at least one peer reviewer, and I don't think we've had one yet that has not undergone revisions on its way to publication. And we also have a steering committee, and these are members of the community that range from education to industry to law to labor to politics or government. And we've met 3 times so far, and they really provide the community and to some extent the financial support to allow Madison Historical to happen. And our hope is that in the future we will have more opportunities to involve the community. And we think this is going to be probably our greatest challenge next year. We've had some success this year, and we hope for more next year. We really see 3 ways in which the community can get involved in this project. The first, and probably the heaviest lift, is we would like to have community members begin to contribute encyclopedia articles. This summer, we are teaching a special section of public history for Madison County school teachers, who we will train in the skills of researching for an encyclopedia article, conducting oral histories, and digitizing artifacts for the digital archive. And our hope is that we'll have them not only begin to contribute encyclopedia articles, but maybe even think about incorporating into their classes their students researching and composing encyclopedia articles to be vetted just like all of the other ones, as a way to get some traction on community contributions for encyclopedia articles. We also hope in the future to begin asking the community to find some artifacts that they think are interesting. They may hold in their personal collections, and we have acquired through a small grant a mobile scanning unit where we can take all the material we need to go to someone and scan some of the artifacts they have. Right now we're primarily using it in local archives and museums. And then when we publish those on the archive, we link to those archives and museums and hope that users will see our site as the beginning of their entrance into the actual location of those materials where they hold more of the collections and they hold them in fact. And finally, where we've had our most success is inviting community members to share oral histories with us. They've ranged from all over the place, from individuals who have lived through the integration of the schools in Venice, Illinois, to the butchers at Quality Meats in downtown Edwardsville, which has been there since 1947, who reflected on their time as an Edwardsville landmark. That's it. So now, Ben, we'll talk a little bit about the complicated stuff.
Yeah. Well, I won't go into super huge detail unless people ask for it. Of just how the website is structured, because as he mentioned, we have 2 sides. We have an encyclopedia and we have an archive. And if you're familiar with content management systems, or CMS, as some people call them, the encyclopedia and the archive actually have different content management systems. The encyclopedia is WordPress, and the archive is Omeka, which if you remember an earlier talk, Katie and I gave a talk about Omeka earlier this semester. So the idea was that the encyclopedia was well suited for WordPress because WordPress was really originally built for blogging and self-publishing on the web. And a lot of WordPress's features worked well with the ideas that we had. For example, being able to organize the different articles in these different ways. Or if you go to an article, here's a list. It'll organize an article alphabetically. And then also, since it's WordPress, it stores the information of when the article was written and when it was last modified, which in this case was the same day because this went up like this week. But on the archive side, which uses Omeka, it uses more of an Omeka structure. If you look at an item, you can get all of the Omeka metadata that you can put for different archive items. And Omeka, if you don't know, was built for museums and archiving on the internet or on websites, or you could even use Omeka locally if you so chose. So yeah, you can, and in having two content management systems, it was important to maintain the same visual appearance of both websites, which was a bit tricky for me to figure out. Not ridiculously difficult, but basically the website I built using a HTML and CSS template called Material Kit, which uses Bootstrap, if you've heard of Bootstrap, which is basically a way to make websites easily responsive. And if you look at the website, you can see that there are some of the basic formatting of the website kind of comes from this template, but I, for one thing, changed this purple to blue and changed a few other things. I can't remember everything exactly, but just a lot of different things you can do with it that were pretty cool. So I basically used that template on both the WordPress and Omeka backend to make it look like you were on the same website when in fact you're being served by a completely different content management system. But there are some other features going on the website that I had to figure out. For example, this calendar that we created for our community events, I did during using a WordPress plugin called, I believe it uses Google Calendar. And then if you create events in a Google Calendar, it will pull them in and display them in this calendar. And let's see, I believe it's under, yes, partner institutions. This is our page for listing every single museum or institution that we've worked with. And I included a map of all the institutions using Google My Maps, which at the last talk, Rajesh talked about in March. So here is an example of it in action. If you can zoom into all the different archives and museums and libraries in Madison County, and you can also get them in this list as well.
Ben's being a little modest about how important this page actually is to us. We were really excited when we got this together. And Jeff and I recently had an experience that I think that exemplifies the power of what Ben's created here. We were at the museum at the Phillips 66 refinery. Was it last week? Mm-hmm. And we were talking with a couple of the curators there, and one of them told us a story where someone came in and said, "You cost me a cup of coffee." And the curator said, "Well, I'm sorry, I didn't know. How did I cost you a cup of coffee?" And the guy said, "I bet someone, when they told me that there was a museum on the refinery site, I bet them that it wasn't true because I've been on this refinery site and I'm sure there's no museum here. And finally I had to look around and I found you. And therefore I had to buy this guy a cup of coffee." So our hope is that this can be a really, like I said, a hub where once we begin to acquire artifacts from the Phillips 66 Museum, that will link directly to the museum, and now Ben has directions here with address and phone number that people can actually then go to the museum itself. So instead of looking at it as a way to harvest materials that museums have and turn them into digital and effectively make them obsolete, instead we'd like to think of this as a way in which to invite people to actually go to the museums themselves and see the material in fact.
Yeah, just to show off an example of that, if you go to an Encyclopedia article, let's see, here's one that'll have it. This is an article about the Owens-Illinois Glass Company written by one of our grad students, Jessica Mills. And it'll take you to that photographs page in Omeka. So this is WordPress and this is Omeka. and it'll give you more information about that photograph.
And just make clear that we
Yeah.
toggled between the encyclopedia and the archive.
Right. So,
So
and even
then-
when you're on the item itself, if you go to source, it'll tell you which museum holds this item, and then you can click it and it'll take you, in this case, to their Facebook page.
Question?
Yeah, Ben, what you're saying then is a material kit built on Bootstrap is like a frame, and then you can put
Right.
WordPress in one, and you can put Omeka in the other. But that way, that's how you keep continuity.
Right, yeah, because
Okay.
they're both built with the same, as you put it, frame or HTML, CSS template. Also some JavaScript. One other thing on the archive that I've done recently that I'm really excited about, and if you've seen me in the past few weeks, you've noticed how excited I am about it. We have this new viewer for books. Click it to actually do the arrow keys, which we have these various books that we've digitized, and now we have this nice little viewer for books that basically this is the book viewer used by the Internet Archive, which, I'll pull that up real quick. It's basically open source book viewing software that I installed in the past few weeks, which of course is, there we go. So that's just one cool thing that I got working by just looking on the internet for stuff to use. There's all these different parts coming together essentially for the website.
What is this book? About?
Yeah, this is a product catalog for the Owens Illinois Glass Company, which used to be, I believe, the largest glass producer in the world, based in Alton.
Had 3,000 employees as late as the 80s.
Yeah, closed
Yeah.
in '83, I think.
We were
Yeah.
very excited when we got this artifact. I mean, the images are just beautiful.
Yeah.
And I would say big picture, I think one thing that we're discovering is that there's an interesting sort of range of books, in particular bound books, that are suitable to digitization in a project like this. I mean, people I'm sure are familiar with, Google Books and sort of large-scale scanning initiatives. But if you followed that saga, they are working with their partner libraries, which are mostly large academic type libraries. So the types of things that have been scanned are scholarly books, older materials, things like that. And you'll have very individualized scanning things where people are putting up old family photos or things like that. But there's this interesting middle ground of kind of gray literature or corporate ephemera and things like that that I think we've been able to find and digitize that otherwise wouldn't probably get digitized. Old product catalogs, things like that. That we're finding, I think, an interesting niche for in this project.
Yep. Is there anything else you wanted me to show
How
off?
about our oral history?
Oh yeah.
How we constructed this?
Yes, oral history would be good.
For the images in the archive, I know that it's a digital archive, so it's not that you now own the object, but how does permissions or rights work with
Great question.
the right to put this into the archive?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the nice things in history is that if you go far enough back, they're public domain things. So a lot of what like that book you saw, all the pre-1923 material is public domain. So in a lot of cases, we've handled it in that way. In other cases, we've had to go item by item and get permission to, I forget how, we've structured almost everything around, as you'll see, a Creative Commons, non-commercial share-like 4.0 international license. So again, because we don't own the material, we've asked for sort of the usage rights for digitization in that way. So we're not claiming any copyright ownership over it, which is different than some digitization projects. Everything we have is available for free online. We have no plans to do subscriptions or charge people for any of this kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we offer the archives if we scan the materials is that we will provide them with high-resolution copies of the images we made.
All right, so an oral history, real quick. So this is one of them. Dr. Stacy did this interview with Paul Brazier, who is, he essentially talked about biking in Madison County in the 70s through the 90s. And we have a full transcript of the oral history as a PDF up on the site. There's also an audio file here. I don't know if this.
This is Jason Stacy.
I mean, you get the idea. You can, of course, download the file and put it on your phone and listen to it like a podcast if you were so interested. Or you could just listen to it on the website.
And there were a lot of kids, Edwardsville was a very different town back.
Trains that, had, trains on all the time, up until probably.
So, yeah, that's just one of the cool things you can do with it. And the nice thing about the oral histories is that the nice thing is that it's a history that is much more personal as opposed to sort of like this detached academic sort of history.
And so far, it's been our easiest way to ask for community contributions.
Mm-hmm.
People always seem ready to say, hey, you've got to talk to this person and ask them if they would like to do one. And so we've got a pretty long backlog of people who we need to talk to.
Right. All right, I think that's all I wanted to
Can I ask you
show
about ADA compliance? Is it any struggles or challenges with trying to make the site design work with that?
A little bit. I mean, I've made sure to follow the I forget what the standard is called, but I've set it up so that, like these images, for example, since if you're blind, you obviously can't, or if you're sight impaired, you can't read what this image says. So I set up alt text to read out loud what each button does whenever you click it, for example. Yes, Dr. Kerber?
And what support does the initiative receive through ITS, from ITS?
So this is on the SIUE server, and we did receive server space from them this past fall. Beyond that, I pretty much do all of the IT support. Occasionally there'll be something that I need to get working on the website that ITS doesn't provide me the permission to do, so then I have to send them an email and they have to tweak something for me, but that doesn't happen very often. So
It's really all Ben is the answer. Very little, and Ben does all this all day.
So my follow-up question is, what commitment do they have to the long-term preservation of the site, of the content?
It's a great question.
yeah.
Since SIUE has no overall plan
Yeah.
for preserving
Yeah.
digital content.
It's a great question, and when we first started this last year, our first set of discussions was about this sort of hosting, should we host it through SIUE and things like that. And for a variety of reasons, we are hosting it on the SIUE servers. Whether or not that's going to be the appropriate long-term home for it, we'll see.
I mean, talking about like the digital archive, every single image or audio file or PDF or whatever is backed up on an external hard drive that we have. So that's not all of, it's all backed up, and I occasionally back up the website itself onto that external hard drive. So if every single SIUE server crashed tomorrow, the website would be okay. Is the short answer to that.
Yeah.
Long term, I don't know exactly how sustainable that is, but it is definitely something that we're dealing with.
All
I'll
right,
let you
I'll
take
just
over.
wrap up sort of by briefly, because I want to save time for any more questions. And feel free, or small groups, so if you have other questions as they go, let me know. Let me just wrap up by, given the scope of the Brown Bag series, I wanted to wrap up by trying to address this question of where does a project like Madison Historical fit in the larger field of digital humanities? This field of digital humanities that's emerging and changing and developing. How do we fit something like this in here? And the way that I thought it might be most useful to approach that is to try and flesh out, I think there's some of my tentative thoughts about where a project like this and what I think of as public history fits within sort of the larger system or family tree, if you will, of digital humanities. For those of you who are unfamiliar with public history, I teach a class here at SIUE called Public History. It's one of the fields I work in. oftentimes we public historians say that the definition of public history is similar to the Supreme Court's famous definition of pornography, that it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. Or I mean, if you need a technical definition, the National Council on Public History defines it as the many and diverse ways in which history is put to work in the world. In this sense, it is history that is applied to real-world issues. So practically what this means is we public historians have an emphasis on community-engaged scholarship, scholarship that's done fundamentally with and for community audiences, not just sort of holed up in our offices on campuses. One of our key principles is an idea of shared authority, literally sharing the scholarly authority with those communities in terms of what's significant, what matters, what the outcomes need to be. And there's been we often focus on process more so than output. The process of creating something is as important, if not more important, than the final product that gets created, be it a website, a book, things like that. So I came at this project as a public historian, and I think that is, sort of built into the DNA of Madison Historical. A little bit of history of it. Public history is a field that goes back to about the 1970s or so, and actually has quite deeper roots, going back into work done by the National Park Service in the early 20th century and things like that. But public historians were early adopters of a lot of digital technologies when they started to come online in the 1980s and 1990s. The best example of this nationally is the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University, which is the group that created Omeka and things like that, pioneered by a historian named Roy Rosenzweig, who was a real pioneer of sort of combining public history with digital tools. Because a lot of public historians, we were interested in reaching out to the community, in engaging public audiences, sharing materials, and we immediately saw that, hey, these interesting new digital tools, especially once you started to shift over to the web, seemed to contain fantastic possibilities for disseminating information, sharing ideas, democratizing historical practice, and sharing authority. So what I think a lot of public historians working in digital history have done is attempted to take approaches that predated digital humanities, like oral history, like museum curation, and sort of adopt these new technologies into it. So that's kind of in the background of a lot of the work that we've done here. And practically, what that means, I think, is that this project comes out of a side of the family tree of digital humanities, if you will, that's rooted in public history. And I think there are some differences within digital humanities between that public history background and what you might call a humanities computing field that are worth mentioning. So for example, the humanities computing folks who focused on building large data sets, using text encoding to read a giant corpus of text, things like that, new tools to answer old questions, if you will. And more of a focus on tool building, literally programming interesting new tools to accomplish these tasks. Those of us on the public history side of things, I think have been a little less interested in those types of tasks, and more interested in tools, simple, flexible tools that can democratize historical authority. So there's been a real emphasis on keeping things simple and transparent, so much so that I think there's actually now an interesting pushback at times. If you go to a digital history or public history conference, the big national one is meeting right now, actually, in Indianapolis. There'll be a lot of questions about, like, well, is digital the right format for this at all? Are you sort of making things complex and obscuring them from your audience by putting them up on the web? Or is everybody comfortable with the web? The question I get a lot of times is, like, wouldn't a simple mobile app be easier? Most people are on mobile stuff these days. So a huge percentage of African American audiences, for example, access mobile first. So like when you're building all these desktop things in digital humanities, how useful is that? So those kind of questions have been, I think, more important for digital public historians. But there, of course, are a lot of overlaps between these fields, too. The idea that the web is this powerful tool for disseminating scholarly knowledge and a really powerful tool for access. So just, the larger scope of what is digital humanities, I think that hopefully helps to sort of set up what a project like this is and how it fits in this broader ecosystem of other projects happening within digital humanities and other projects even happening within the IRIS Lab. So let me wrap up, or finish up by saying, what are some ways in which this public history, digital humanities approach has influenced what we've done with Madison Historical. And I was thinking of 4 things. Point 1 is that I think our partnerships with these community institutions have proven to be really crucial. Partnerships with the small museums, archives, and libraries throughout Madison County have been absolutely central to what we do. When we started this project, I think we imagined that we would, of course, reach out to these groups, but maybe there'd be a handful of them. And we very quickly discovered, even in one single county, we have over a dozen museums, archives, libraries, and there's a great range of them. Everything from very professional operations like the Madison County Historical Society here in Edwardsville to a group of 4 or 5 people that meet once a month in someone's living room to share old high school photos of Venice, Illinois. And being partners with them on as close to an equal level as we can has been really crucial to what we do. And the basic pitch that we make, which Jason alluded to, was to say, you've got stuff, you've got really interesting collections, but oftentimes you don't have the time or technology to make them available on the web. We have the personnel time and the technology to do that, but we don't have any stuff. So this seems like a natural partnership. We're not taking ownership of any of their collections. We don't take the stuff. They retain the physical copies. But we are able to scan them, and now with our mobile scanning kit, doesn't even have to leave the building or the basement or wherever it is to make it available on the web. So that's become, I think, a really important thing that we're able to do to form a partnership with groups like this. And also, I think this is hopefully the digital side of things is going to become an important opportunity to take what are previously pretty siloed collections and put them in conversation with one another. So for example, the Collinsville Museum has a big collection on coal mining in Collinsville. The Glen Carbon Museum has a big collection on coal mining in Glen Carbon. The Alton Museums have collections on coal mining in Alton. But currently, there's very little conversation between these groups. And so we're hoping that it might be sort of a moment by digitizing them and putting them up here in a relatively kind of flat digital structure to see some interesting connections between them that you wouldn't otherwise see in these small archives. So point 2, I think this public history approach has shaped choices that we've made about what goes into the archive. Like I said, one of the key principles of public history is this idea of shared authority. And what this often means for those, as we're maintaining and accepting new things, taking new things into this archive, is to fundamentally accept community partners' decisions about what's important. This is sort of where the rubber meets the road of shared authority in my mind, because people will come to us with things. They'll say, hey, I've got this collection. I mean, we just had a talk this past week about the Collinsville Museum has a photograph collection of every baby that was born, delivered by one doctor in Collinsville. Apparently it's a relatively big collection, and they're all baby photos.
Like 20 to 30.
Yeah, and they
look the same.
and this is it, right? And so part of me as a historian is saying, like, how many baby photos do we need, right? I mean, but as the principle of shared authority says, hey, they've told us what's important. They've come to us with this collection and said, baby photos. So, yeah, baby photos.
There's a mosaic program you can use to turn those photos into a portrait of that doctor.
Okay.
Maybe you should, or of whatever. You input one photo and then you draw from a well of the other photos to make the original. So you could do something mosaic-like with them.
Well, I think this gets to a point, right, that we, I have certain ideas about what is significant in the county history, but I think we have to recognize that my authority only goes so far, and I don't know the uses to which other people are going to put these. Like that, someone might do a very interesting project to make a mosaic of the doctor's photo out of the baby's photos, or something like that. That's far out of my thinking as an academic historian. So I think that's been something that we've tried to think through. Another aspect of this in terms of what goes into the archive, and this might, you might wince if you have archival training here, is that a lot of our metadata is incomplete and relatively messy. And I think fundamentally we have to be sort of okay with that a lot of the museums will approach us and say, the only thing we know about these photos is that they were given to us in 1992. And, in part as an archivist, to say like, boy, that's really hard to, what do we do with that, right? I think this is farm equipment from the 1930s. I'm not even sure it's from Collinsville. But again, as a public historian, we say the important thing is to kind of get it up and make it available to the public, even with very incomplete information. So that's always a trade-off. People who are more on the preservation, formal archival side would make different judgment calls in that regard than we make in this project.
Can I jump in and say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and also there's a difference with if you have a web archive as opposed to a physical archive.
Right.
In a physical archive, you have space constraints and staff management constraints. It's hard to manage a large physical collection, whereas a digital collection, there are still, of course, space constraints, but I would say that there is less of a space constraint than there would be, say, for a physical archive. So that's one reason, perhaps, why you could justify having 200 baby photos. Yeah.
Can I just make a crazy observational comment? Like, there's this concept of a middle range that's never really fully hashed out, because there's kind of people's base level experience with their world, and it's very temporal, and then it goes away, right? And then there's what historians and other people decide to put in the canons of history or literature, or mass communication research, which is, taking those temporal things and then putting them into some type of academic framework or something. But it seems like the work of kind of connecting those two worlds is going to fall on us, and it's going to be done by creating other platforms and not necessarily translating our research for so-called lay people, and not necessarily getting people interested in the academic research who otherwise have kids to raise and lawns to mow and stuff like that. It's creating these types of things. So it's a wholly new kind of product. It's not public history isn't new, and databases aren't new, and museums aren't new, but it's raising a question, or maybe it's starting to partially answer a question of who's going to fill in that middle ground between kind of our regular experience of history and what we're taught in high school, and then what the academics know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's put well. I mean, I think that's sort of articulates it actually better than I was in some ways. But sort of what we're working around here and sort of the mission we're trying to fulfill, figuring it out as we go. And let me just real quickly mention, two last points about how I think this public history mission has sort of shaped what we've done. It shaped the Encyclopedia as well, as Jason already talked about. We're inviting community authors to write these things, and we haven't had a great deal of luck so far in getting that buy-in, but hopefully we will soon. But this is one of those moments where you have to essentially let go of some of that scholarly authority at times and say, this is different than how I would write this. I'm not even sure I would have this as an article, but there's a different type of authority being articulated here. And also that regional or city or state level encyclopedias like this play an important public history function in terms of community definition. The basic work that we do about saying, hey, what is a place like Madison County? Where has it been? And by implication, where is it going? So I think we've already started to flesh out some interesting dynamics there that might be useful, not just to historians, but community planners, things like that, right? The transition, for example, of the community of Madison County from heavy industry in the 20th century to service sector jobs today. A lot of what we traced is the heyday and then collapse of the heavy industry economy, largely down along the river, all throughout Madison County. The history of racial tension here. We have a number of oral history interviews that talk about Jim Crow signs up until the 1960s in a place like Venice that said, blacks not served at this gas station in Venice, Illinois. Things like that, the collapse of coal mining. So it's tracing out some, I think, really interesting big picture things that the community is wrestling with, in one way or another, and it can serve a helpful function in sort of crystallizing some of those long-term issues. And finally, the last point Jason already mentioned is integration with K through 12 educators. And that's something we're hoping to develop this summer, but thinking about ways that classrooms and democratized even further in these classrooms with teachers working with students at a variety of grade levels to add to this, and maybe see these things they're reading about in their textbooks, these processes happening literally in their own backyard. So that's what we're hoping to get to further on. And I'll wrap things up there, but hopefully that sort of articulates where a project like this fits in the broader scheme of digital humanities as it is taking place in all the different projects happening within the IRIS lab. That's all
I have one question. How many such archives are there? I mean, maybe not exactly like yours, but do a lot of counties or other small communities have online encyclopedias or archives or presences of some kind? Like St. Clair County or Cook County or, I don't know, other...
Yeah. The answer is yes. I mean, there's lots of initiatives like this, essentially online local history initiatives. They happen at different scales, though. A number of states. I think the encyclopedia part is more common. You know, the old regional encyclopedias, or a specialized encyclopedia, there are lots of those, and they, of course, long predate the digital realm. A lot of them have shifted over to be online only these days because it's just more flexible and more cost efficient. A lot of states have them. The new Georgia Encyclopedia is a good example. I think Texas, Alabama, Minnesota, a number of them have a state-level encyclopedia. A lot of those are run by like a state historical society or some sort of state library or state archive. There are also a lot of city ones, so like New York, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis have city and metro area encyclopedias, and they're again oftentimes run by a historical society or something like that. Here, there's a Chicago encyclopedia. There's no state level Illinois encyclopedia that I know of. In terms of the archives, I think it's more hit or miss. There is an effort to digitize lots of Illinois holdings. Dr. Kerber could probably speak more to this, more comprehensively to this than I could. The old Illinois Digital Archive, which you can go find. But there's lots of them popping up. So I think one of the questions that we're starting to wrestle with now is how to make sure the material we're collecting, especially in the archive, gets pulled into these big streams of broader history. The big effort for this that I'm familiar with is the Digital Public Library of America, DP.LA, which is trying to harvest all of these small-scale things all over the place and make them available. So if you go to the DPLA site and type in Edwardsville, it'll pull up a bunch of stuff. It'll pull up stuff from Carbondale's digital collections, from Missouri History Museum's digital collections, U of I's collections, things like that. So I think that's one thing we want to do is make sure that, I think it's a challenge for historians and for archivists right now.
I mean, part of why I asked is I found that many of our students, undergraduates, don't know the history of their towns or where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a nice entry point for students to learn about history, especially as it relates to them.
I just want to comment to Steve about that's something that local independent online news publishers are starting to do, which is to build a local wiki or some type of local history to sort of allow people who want to drill down on what's been going on in some particular zoning issue or whatever, but to add more context, and particularly in places that have rich history. And I'm thinking of a place called Uptown Messenger of a site called Uptown Messenger in New Orleans that has a lot of history to talk about. But where those are possible, they're pet projects, but there may be a way to get grant funding to find other sources of revenue for these little sites that are otherwise really hard to keep afloat. Mm-hmm. And I had a question if nobody else does.
Well, Steve,
I'll
go ahead.
I'll be glad to wait. Go ahead.
It might be really inane. When you walk into Walgreens, just about anywhere in America, you'll see a bunch of sepia-toned little mini books that are like your local history.
Yeah,
Arcadia Press.
Arcadia Press. Where does that come from?
There's one for Edwardsville too.
Right.
I don't know where Arcadia's out of, but they're very, very good at recruiting people interested in local history. And they're nice little books. I mean, they're mostly photographs with some text, but they're nicely made and they're pretty interesting.
I think they originated in South Carolina, and they have succeeded because they came up with a perfect business model. As the author, you are responsible for all the work of the book. You give them a digital file containing the text and the images, and all the work and all the expense of creating that are on you. And then they take your content and they pay some poor underpaid person who has not that skill set, but a similar skill set, to put that into their standardized format, and then they sell it, and you get a very small royalty. So they have a great business model based on technology, and as you say, it has been an extremely successful business.
They own the copyright on those, Steve, when they produce them?
The final product,
Yeah.
not the original individual items, but yeah, the final, yes.
And to your question, Steve, just back to who else is doing this, and Jeff can probably speak to this better than I, but from my experience with digital humanities, there is nothing that's taking the county, as I mentioned earlier, as an entity worth recording a history. And that was just, it wasn't our idea to do that, it's because Bob Diver, the regional superintendent, said, hey, let's do something with Madison County. But, and I can't speak for all counties, but we've found it a very interesting one because unlike a state, which is a really very, very big project, and a city which is pretty discrete and has a lot of complexity to it, but still is effectively an urban history, this county study that we're doing is a very interesting kind of microcosm. So we think that's novel as an entity for historicizing.
Yeah, I mean, especially, as a 20th century U.S. historian myself, it's made me think a lot about the county as a scale of analysis that we have not focused enough on, quite frankly, as modern U.S. historians. If you think in your own life, you only encounter the county when you have to pay property taxes or something like this. But those are important things, right? And all of the, our entire court system is based at the county level and things like that, which is why Madison County is known as one of the top 5 judicial hellholes in the country. So there's questions there about that.
But of course, you scratch the surface, and there's all sorts of sense on the part of people who reside in counties about their counties. So I grew up in Will County, and Cook County was an entity that defined who we were in Will County. And of course, there's all sorts of meaning between St. Clair County versus Madison County here, so that there is something there, I think, to be explored. It's just not something that, on a particular level, we normally think about as something worth historicizing, thinking about historically.
And I will say, I think we're fortunate here, we've talked about this, that, they say that Illinois demographically is the most representative state in the country. And I've had people now tell me that for whatever reason, maybe they're just flattering me, but that Madison County is in some ways one of the more representative counties within Illinois, in that we've got heavy industry along the river, and it's agricultural in the east, and sort of eds and meds here in the center of the county, sort of representative-ish levels of racial and ethnic groups and things like that. So it is an interesting microcosm. If you had to pick a county to do a microcosm of, it's an interesting one. I mean, if you look out the window here, right, you can see a refinery one direction and towards farmland in the other, and we're in a university here as well. So it's been an interesting place to do this versus, if we were doing this in a more strictly rural southern Illinois county, right, it might be a lot of agriculture or something like that. Steve, you had a question.
I was just curious if you all have explored the possibility of working with genealogical groups as opposed to repositories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have. Some of our partner groups that are up there, the Madison County Genealogical Society, and in practice, a number of these smaller museums and archives, their real volunteer base is family historians. And we've started to get some material of people that are doing family histories on their own that want to preserve, want to make it available in this way. Family history is one of these things where people devote huge amounts of time, develop tremendous amounts of expertise, and spend a lot of money on doing historical work. And academic historians oftentimes, can get a little snobby about this, being like, oh, that's not what we do, that's not it, it's just sort of focused on a family. But I think, again, this is one of these moments where by having a big tent approach and bringing that in, we can draw some interesting connections. So, for example, we had a guy approach us with a very interesting book that he had put together on the Vogeli families of Southern Illinois. He's a family historian, has researched a deep family tree of his family out in Highland, Illinois. And he shared the book with us and said, hey, feel free to digitize it, you have my permission. So we digitized it, made it available through the book scan, using the book scanner and in the Iris Lab and the book viewer app that Ben uploaded. So now it's a really attractive format for making it available, and it's got really interesting information about the immigration history from southern Germany in the 1850s into the Highland area, and then scattering out throughout here. So we know this information, but it would be really helpful for a lot of researchers or students doing research beyond just that one sort of tracing a family tree kind of thing.
So I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to add a little bit. My, I guess personal hope for entryways into this also is that we might actually get to the point where people will just come to the search engine on the front page and then just punch in a name. And those names can get pulled up in all sorts of ways. So for example, if someone has authored an Encyclopedia article, they're going to show up as one of the authors. If they've done an oral history or someone they know has done an oral history. If they're one of the 200 babies or their grandparents that have been delivered. Or they show up as the Vogley family, and this book may show up. So, there's the possibility of someone who may not just be doing traditional research, but may just be interested in kind of noodling around the site, that there'll be lots of ways of entering into it.
And let me just say, this speaks to this question about Arcadia Press and family history, and the role of digital humanities at a place like SIUE, I think. I think a project like this speaks to an important function that we can do in terms of doing projects like this at a regional master's comprehensive university. There's lots of big digital humanities projects at R1s that are more scholarly and more ambitious in terms of history. I think of examples like the Transatlantic Slave Database. Historians have created a very comprehensive digital database of all the transatlantic slave voyages. Yeah, the Whitman Archive. These are fabulous, important projects, but they're frankly beyond sort of the resources we have available here. But I think we can do a really good job at this sort of local level, being a hub for things at the local level, and hopefully maybe reclaiming some of that space from the private for-profit companies that have done most of it at this point, like Arcadia Press, or in family history, Ancestry.com has kind of eaten the whole world of family history. So it's really useful, provided you pay the subscription fee. So it'd be, I'm maybe overly optimistic here, but I think clawing back a little bit of that territory for the local level for us, making it open source, making it available via a regional institution like ours is an important function that we can do.
We only have the room till about 3. I bet that battery camera is probably
It's about
Okay, yeah.
But it also, I don't want to steal the last word, maybe I will, is it also opens up, as you just said, this interesting and important question about who gets to archive, who gets to be a part of archival and digital exhibit and representation activities in the field of documentation linguistics where I work. It's kind of the common assumption that if you're going to archive, you have this kind of set of established archival repository structures that you must deliver your product to. Like, you have to choose from one of those, and you wouldn't dare take your own home institution as an option for local archiving of your materials because they don't follow, or you can't prove that they follow these kind of standard conventions and standard practice. And so in a way, certain linguists, myself included, like to push back and say, well, maybe these standard archives are good for some deposits, but there are also other types of projects that can happen more at the local level as well. You raised a good point earlier, like what's the institution's obligation then in long-term hosting and maintenance of these projects? Well, we exist constantly under the cloud of what kind of support we get at the state level, but also it's possible now to seek funding from different sources that would then go back to the university's ITS to at least kind of provide that long-term server space. Humans are more expensive to fund, but at least the server space is something that seems to be fairly reasonable so far. So I like the idea of clawing back.
Yeah, and as historians, and I'll maybe take the last word here, but we have to go. But this question about what to do about the social media piece of it. So I've been approached a couple times. People say like, hey, there's this page called Old Edwardsville Memories or something like this on Facebook, where people are posting all kinds of old photos and commenting, hey, look at my grandma, and what to do about things like that, right? Because on the one hand, they're fabulous in terms of, there's a tremendous amount of engagement. I think most archives wish that every item you had up in there had dozens of comments on it and things like that. But on the other hand, it's just ephemeral, right? Like Facebook could change some policy tomorrow and they're all wiped out, or whatever kind of crosses your feed, and there's no institutional memory of it whatsoever. So how to strike a middle balance between those things as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for coming today. And Stay tuned for Iris Brown Bags of the Future, starting next academic year. We'll be putting out a calendar for those as well. So have a lovely weekend and stay sane.